Hi guys, I'm Stephy Fung. I'm a 3D artist and I will show you guys my workflow for digital fashion. I've been a 3D artist for around roughly 4 years and it's been a ride. I actually started in a graphic design background and now, fast forward 4 years, I am now currently doing digital fashion for all my projects. The programs I tend to use on a day-to-day basis include DAZ 3D, Adobe, you're talking about Photoshop, Illustrator, InDesign, After Effects as well, mostly, and Cinema 4D, Clo 3D / Marvelous Designer, and Substance Painter. Here's a little bit of my background. So I actually studied graphic design and I studied that at university before I moved into motion graphics. Most of my art before digital fashion were very abstract shapes and forms, I would say. But one thing that followed through from my abstract shape and form or my previous work before I dived into digital fashion is the fact that I was always attracted to using bright, vibrant colours. I've also had the pleasure of working with clients such as Vogue Singapore, Xbox, Selfridges, The Face Magazine, Jo Malone, Highsnobiety and Glenfiddich. And the reason why I got into digital fashion was because I worked on a project with Digigirl and Selfridges on a collaboration, and I saw the possibilities of digital fashion. And now at that point, I did not know how to create any digital fashion. I was actually there as a 3D artist to help build the environment, to do texturing, camera animation, anything like that. But I saw there was two fashion designers that were building garments out of nothing, and I saw how compatible the skills for digital fashion and 3D was, and I was so inspired from that project that last year I took the leap of faith and I started to learn Marvelous Designer. As we fast forward a year later, I am now constantly making digital fashion and placing them into 3D environments. I feel like that is my jam, that is my thing. My current inspiration for my fashion, I would say, is mostly coming from a British Chinese background. I always look towards showcasing traditional Chinese garments, but in a modern flair. I'm also really into streetwear and also techwear. So the combination of the both, of bringing modern and traditional, makes it really interesting. So we will cover today in this talk garment creation process, texturing within Redshift, creating a Redshift material, constraints, modeling in Cinema 4D, lighting in Redshift, and Aovs. And the scene we will be analyzing or building, it will be this one right here, which is a collaboration I did with Deadfellas for their Halloween event. So the theme is infected, and it was also based off spooky or Halloween vibes, so we have gone really full on for like sci-fi vibes in this scene. So let's get into it and I will show you guys how to build this scene. Now the process roughly for digital fashion always starts this way for me. So I would usually sketch my ideas onto my iPad and get the visual sketched down as fast as possible. Once I'm happy with the sketch, then I would bring it into Clo 3D or Marvelous Designer, and I will start designing and building my garments on a pre-rigged DAZ avatar, which already has a rigged walking cycle. Now, building of the garment may take an hour, it might take a day, it might take 2 days, it depends how complex the garment is. But once I'm happy with that, I will bring it into Substance Painter for texturing, and then we bring it into Cinema 4D, and this is where we can build the 3D environment. This is where we can bring in the garment, the 3D environment, and build a story around the garment and the fashion. And once that is all set, then we will render out everything in Redshift. So for this Deadfellas collaboration that I did, we won't be showing you guys how I imported the avatar from DAZ, and we won't be showing the Clo 3D or Marvelous Designer garment creation process. Instead, we will be focusing on how we export the correct format from building a garment from Clo 3D and bringing that into Cinema 4D, and how we link up all the correct textures from Clo 3D to Cinema 4D to Redshift. If you guys are curious about the beginning process from DAZ to Clo 3D, then feel free to check out my own YouTube channel. So once you have made your garment, you should have something like this. And before we export it into Cinema 4D, there are a few things you want to do. I like to have my animation simulated, so you go to this tab up here, click animation, and when you're now in the animation tab, you can see the timeline. I'm just going to change this to real time so we can see it happening and walking in real time. And I've already baked this. So this is the baked simulation we will be exporting as an alembic. After checking the animation is all good and baked, we can go and press back to the beginning and also go up to this tab up here, press this animation tag, and we want to go to UV editor. Now in the UV editor, you just want to organize and layer UVs nicely so that when it comes to texturing, at least this will be nice and organized. So I usually texture in Substance Painter or in Photoshop. If that's all done, then you go back to simulation, you can go to File, Export, and we can choose Alembic Ogawa. Create a new folder, we'll call this Alembic, and we will save this in this folder. So we can call this Maxon tutorial Alembic, and we will export it from here. Everything should be default here. I don't think you really need to change anything, so you can press OK here and let it export. Once the alembic has exported, what you also want to do is go to File, Export. We want to export as an OBJ as well. This is so that you can apply your texture sets onto your alembic, and I will teach you how to do that in Cinema 4D. So we'll go onto here, and I've already got a folder for OBJ. I've already got one saved, but you know what? I'll save another one. We'll call this one Maxon tutorial OBJ. Copy that. And we'll save. So we've got options here. So I personally like to not include the avatar because you can, but in my work I don't like to. So all you got to do is just untick it here, and you can leave all of this the same, apart from you got to make sure you've ticked your unified UV coordinates. Okay, so I think it's usually unticks, but you just tick it, make it whatever size you guys want, and press OK. And now we are ready to move on to Cinema 4D. Okay, now we're in Cinema 4D, so we want to merge what we just exported from Clo 3D. So we'll go to File here, Merge Objects, import the OBJ that you exported, and I press OK for everything. And you might notice that this is quite big, so what you want to do is actually go to coordinates down here and maybe put it to 0.0 or 0.1. 0.1 is good. Yeah, something like that. Okay, so we got our OBJ. I'm actually going to rename this to OBJ so we actually know what it is. Let's bring in the alembic. File, Merge Objects again. And we will import the alembic. Press OK for everything. And of course it is massive, but we can change that with the scale down here if we make it 0.1, 0.1, 0.1. So what you'll notice is that with the alembic, it will be moving, which is great. That's what we want. The OBJ will not be moving. But what you can see is the alembic does not have any textures associated with it. So what we want to do is we want to bring the textures or the texture sets from the OBJ to the alembic. So what I will do is actually I will rename this to ABC alembic, and this one's OBJ, so we know which one's which. Another thing I like to do is actually just change the timeline to a bit longer so that we can see the full length of this animation. So we've got our alembic and OBJ in the same position. So what we want to do now is actually grab in the OBJ, you want to get all of these selection sets or the selection tags, go right to the end, and also highlight this UV tag. So you've highlighted all of them. You don't need these two. And go back here. I want you guys to hold Control. You're going to drag it. So essentially you're copying it over, and you can see it's already copied and pasted it over. So we can actually hide the OBJ now. I don't think we need the OBJ anymore. So if we scrub through now, you can see all of the textures has been imported, and that is good. That is what we want. Okay, now we can delete the OBJ. We don't need that anymore. Next, we are ready to import the textures. And before we do that, I just want to move this alembic down a little bit so that it's centered. A little bit centered on the camera. Something like this. Nice. So I usually texture in Substance Painter. So this is the Dead Fillers piece that I textured. I won't show you the process of that, but I will show you guys the end product. And we are ready to export this. This is ready to be exported. So we go to File, go to Export Textures. So from here, you will choose your output directory. This is the folder you want to save it in. Then I like to choose Redshift as my output template. They've got many other formats, but because I use Redshift in Cinema 4D, this is the one I tend to use. And of course the file type, you can choose whichever one you want to use. I'm using PNG and 16 bits, and my size is going to be 2048 pixels. So once you're ready with all these settings and everything is ticked on the side, you are going to press export, and it will export as images to your destination folder. Now I've already exported, so I won't be pressing this, but for those guys who are interested in exporting from Substance Painter, this is what you will press here. So once you've exported from Substance Painter, it will go into your destination folder here. It's got color, you've got displacement, emission, metalness, and normal and roughness. So I will show you guys how to plug in one of the textures into Cinema 4D. So this is where I strongly recommend naming your selection sets from Clo 3D, because it all follows through. And what I mean by that is that if we look at Clo 3D, everything that you name here, your naming conventions for your layers, it will follow through in Substance as well, okay? And it will also follow through for when you're in Cinema 4D. All your textures will be named exactly the same. So it's very important that you guys name your layers starting from Clo, because there have been many times that, well, at the beginning where I didn't name my layers, and then it took me way longer than I needed to find the correct texture here and link it up. So for example, we can texture the pants here. We can double click on that, and actually right now is a standard Cinema 4D texture. We want to change this into a Redshift texture. So what I'd like to do is actually highlight all of these textures here, go to Create, Redshift, I believe it's in Tools, Convert and replace all materials. Now that they have converted, you can double check by just double clicking. And this is the Redshift shader graph. So we've got here, if you read up here, pants front. Okay, so I now know we need to find our exported textures from Substance Painter. Okay, here it is, pants front. So we can actually highlight all of these. Maybe not emission because nothing's glowing. Got metalness, normal, roughness. I believe that's all of them. We just drag it in. Press no for all of them. Okay, so we have our separate texture maps here. So we can first of all plug in the color to diffuse. So actually, if I move this over a little bit, plug this into diffuse color, and we can get rid of this one. Our normal, we can plug into this bump map here, get rid of this one, we don't need that. Metalness, we can go to reflection and go to reflection metalness. And of course, if you use metalness, make sure to change the Fresnel type to metalness as well. Now for displacement, we actually need, if you type in here displacement, put in displacement here, RS displacement, and we need to connect that to here, to the text map, and move over here, and then this RS displacement go to output displacement here. And the last one we need to hook up is roughness. So roughness will go into reflection, roughness. Okay, everything is plugged in. Everything is looking nice, so we can close that. Now, of course, we won't see anything here, but if we turn on Redshift, we can see the texture has changed. Now, of course, we would definitely see this better if we had some lighting. So let's add a dome light for now. There we go. A dome light, we can add an HDRI. I do have an HDRI pack that I use quite often. All right, so I'm gonna import this HDRI image. We could even up the exposure just a little bit. Now we can definitely see a lot more, and I tend to actually just turn off the background because I don't want to see it, so it's under the environment tab here. So let's just go off our camera for a second. I just want to go a bit closer so you guys can see. So all of the textures are here. One thing you guys do need to do, because we've got displacement on this model, or not even on this model, we've got displacement on the texture. If you guys remember, we've got displacement and we've got the bump. So for the displacement, for it to work on the model, what you want to do is go to the alembic, right click, Redshift tags, Redshift objects, and you want to go to geometry, override, tick that, and also tick displacement, and that will just help to bring out the displacement in the model. Now we should be able to see some displacement and some extrusions from the textures that it's reading. I mean, you can make it more dramatic by adjusting the displacement scale here. So if we changed it to something, I don't know, something like this, like 8, you will see there's a little bit more extrusion there. It's a little bit more dramatic. So of course, take your time and play with these values here and just find the right balance for you. Because having displacements will make the garments and the look of the piece look more realistic. Since no fabric or texture is ever smooth and perfect, there's always some kind of imperfection or some bumps on it, so it's always good to have a bit of normal bump or displacement on your textures. I won't show you the whole process of hooking up textures to Redshift because that will take a very long time, but hopefully showing you guys one, it will give you a good idea of how to hook up all the other textures. So once you have done all the textures, it should look something like this. And if we go off the camera actually, just get a closer look, this is what it will look like. And this looks exactly as it does from Substance Painter, which is great. That is exactly what we want. Right, you guys might have noticed we've got the addition of a hat and earrings, and they are actually constrained to this animation. So the animation was simulated and baked in Clo 3D. So how do we get a hat and earrings to stick with the same animation? And this was done with constraints in Cinema 4D. So if I open up this null here of the outfit, we have, as you can see here, we have the hat, the headband, and the alembic. So the alembic is just a garment. We've also got an addition. I've named it body track female. So this is actually the FBX of what we exported from DAZ. This is also the same FBX that we use in Clo 3D. And you guys will see that there are bones inside of this FBX because that is what it is rigged with. So you got the bones here, you got it for the legs and for the neck, for the whole body. And you know it has bones because it will have all of this. So usually it would all be closed. You can see all of the bones here. So how we get the hat and the earrings constrained is what we would do is let's start with the hat. I'll just show you. With the hat, it's got a constraint tag. So the constraint tag, if you right click on the hat, and if we go to rigging, there will be the constraint button and you click that. Once you get the constraint, you need to tick transform. So this one here, transform. Go to the next tab, transform. And then what you want to put here is in the targets tab here, you want to open it up. So this one here, and you want to drop in the bone you want the object to follow. Now, because the hat is going to be sitting on the head, that is what we are going to put on. So what I would do is go to here. This is the FBX. This is the bone. We could open the file up all the way down to the head, and you would drag that in. Hold on. Let's find the constraint again. Click on the constraint tag. Find the head, and you would drop that in right there. Now I can demonstrate this also by, we can make a cube. We can make a cube. Make it like 10 by 10 by 10. Okay, so it's a small cube. It's right there. So what we can do is actually use this new feature in R25 Cinema 4D, and you can grab this cube and it will try and align itself to the normal of this body, which is quite useful actually. It's a really cool placement tool. So let's just say this cube needs to be on the face, let's just say. Okay, and of course you can readjust to see to whatever side or angle you want this cube to be. Okay, let's just say this cube needs to be here. Alright, so we'll do the same thing. We'll go to right click on the cube, and it's in rigging tags. We'll find a constraint. Here's the constraint. We need to tick transform. Find the head of the FBX, drag it into target, and there it is. So if I was to, for example, actually just, hold on, hide the body so we don't see it anymore. And if we were to scrub through this, you can see now the cube is constrained. And that is exactly what we did with the earrings as well. The earrings are just two donuts. At least that's what I call them. The torus, that's what it is. So all I did, let me see. Earrings are just one torus, and they have been added to the symmetry object, so that's why we got two of them. So it's pretty easy. And I think this is a really good way to attach accessories, especially anything that's like a hard object, like earrings or jewelry, or I don't know, anything you want to attach to a rigged body, you can do it this way, which I think is pretty fun. So now we've got the textured garments, we have the constraints all done. This outfit is complete. We now can focus on building the 3D environments that it lives in, and we will also get rid of this cube. We don't need you anymore. For the next section, we are going to start modeling. So I don't think we need Redshift for this. We can do Redshift and textures later, so I'm gonna get rid of Redshift for now. What I do want to do though is go to panel, arrangement, and go to this view. So that we got two views here. And we can change this view here. So if we go to cameras and we go to left, you can change it to the left view. If you go to cameras, you go to, of course, you can do any view you want here. So we want perspective. And sometimes when I'm modeling, I like to have it in two perspective views because one of them will be for the camera view and the other one you can move about freely. Of course, you can do this with Redshift where you can have the perspective view and lock the Redshift viewfinder to the camera. However, I sometimes find that Redshift does slow down the process. So this, having no Redshift renderer turned on, is a lot quicker for me. Another thing I will do is turn this on to Gorod shading. And we can start. So what we want to add is a plane. Of course, we want to make it something like, let's try 3000 by 3000. Let's have a look. Okay, that is massive. We can definitely turn that down. So we can make it like 2000 by 2000. So this is the floor, and I like to actually go up to plane here and hold control, drag it, duplicate it. And this other one that we just duplicated, we're going to rotate it 90 degrees. I'm holding shift whilst rotating. And that will be our background. So we will move this back. Of course, we can have a look here, double check. You guys could move it up if you want to. And now we have a simple set here. Might be too big, but for what we need, the camera is clipping off here, so we shall see. We can always change it at the end. One thing I do want to do is currently it's clipping our trousers here, so I'll actually put both of these into a null. So I'll press Alt G, put it into a null. We'll call this background and floor. And we'll move this down a smidge. And whilst we're at it, right now my camera is turned off in the viewfinder, so I actually want to turn it back on so we can see what angle it is going. And I actually want to move or rotate the background to fit the same angle. And of course you can change your view if you want. If you want it from top, you can do that as well, so it's more accurate. And to be honest, I think what we had was spot on, so that's fine. And we can go back to perspective here. And that is good with me. Now we can turn the camera off. You don't need to see that anymore. Another thing I will do is I will rename my layers just to make sure everything is nice and tidy. So for the concept of this piece, it was for Halloween and the theme was infected and spooky. So I had an idea of placing this piece inside of a sci-fi scene, in particular in a glass which you would see in scientific experiments. And to create that glass tube, we will use one of these. We'll get a cylinder, and of course we will move it so that's in the middle. Maybe move it up a bit. So we click on the cylinder. If we make it something like, I don't know, a bit smaller, we can make the radius a bit smaller. Definitely increase the rotation segments to something like 64 so it's nice and smooth. And this will be our glass container. Okay, so looking at our reference images, we need the top and the bottom of the capsule. So what I'd like to do is actually just hold Control and copy this cylinder by dragging it. So we can call this the bottom one glass cylinder, and we can call the top one bottom. So what we can do now with the bottom one, we can actually increase the radius so that there's a point of difference, but also we want to decrease the height for sure. So you could either drag it down from here, or you could of course adjust it in the height option on the right. So I do think this is too thick, so maybe we'll make it like 51. Another thing I like to do with hard surfaces is give them a fillet or fillet. I'm not sure how you say this, but I turn it on. We can definitely make it less of a curve. We only want a little bit of it. You could even make it 0.5. And it's so subtle, but it does make all the difference to the edge. Okay, so what we'll do now is we'll bring this down. Okay, that will be the bottom. And I think it's time that we go into lines so we can see the segments. So with the cylinder, we go back to object. We want to give the height segments maybe something like 8. The next thing we want to do is make this editable, so I'm going to press C on my keyboard. And the reason why we want to do this is so that we can do some extrusions. So you want to go into your polygons mode. Of course, let's zoom in. Now, as a keyboard shortcut, you're going to press UL for loop selection. So if we select that, if we right click, we can do extrude. And what you're going to do is actually push it inwards. Something like this. We're going to do the same with the one below. So we're going to press UL on the keyboard and highlight. I'm going to right click and extrude and just push it in. Something like that. Okay. One more thing we will do is do a loop cut at the top here. So if we go into edges mode up here, and if we click on our keyboard KL and click, so we've done one cut here and we're going to do one more cut. So let's go to KL again. And what we're going to do now is go back to polygons mode. You press UL on your keyboard. We're going to select what we just cut. We're going to right click and extrude this one upwards. Like so. The last part of the bottom section is we are going to actually duplicate this glass cylinder. Because we need another cylinder, we want to expand it, the radius, a little bit. But we want to make the height way smaller, so we'll make it something like 20. And we'll just move that down. So what I'm doing here is that this is going to be the glowing lights, as you can see in the reference picture. So what I can do now is I could create a material that we could put on this, and it could be something like green. So when we texture this in Redshift, we will replace this texture and make sure it's an emission texture, but for now, for our modeling purposes, I'm just going to put it as a standard Cinema 4D texture so that we can see the differences between the two. And then lastly, we shall rename this to, we shall call it light or glowing lights, because that is what it will be. Now I will put these two into a null. I'm going to press Alt G on my keyboard, group them, call this bottom part. Now for the top part of the capsule, we want to duplicate this bottom part. So I'm going to hold Control, drag it, it will duplicate. Call this one top part. Of course, rename everything. I'm going to call this top. Now what we will do is actually grab that null, bring it to the top, and we're going to rotate it. So we could either rotate it this way and go to the P section and type 180, and that has flipped it round. The next thing we shall do now is actually go to, of course, be in polygon selection. Now you want to press UL again for loop selection, and you want to click on the top geometry here. So we right click, choose bevel, pull this up, and then what we want to do is go to the scale option and just scale the top part down, and you can see the top being scaled down so that it has this kind of smooth bevel to it. You could also go to the move tool and actually just move the extrusion down, and you could have it taller, smaller, it's up to you. I'm gonna have it around here, that looks good to me. And then lastly, stay on polygon mode. We have a little dip in the top part if you look at the reference image, so something like, so we can select these two, or we could even select a bit more, maybe these 4 pieces. Right click, go to bevel, and hold your left mouse button and just extrude it in. So what we can see, this green part here, that is the glowing light. We could either make that smaller or just move it down. So we can go to object and we can make the height a lot smaller, so that it's not in the way of any other geometry. Now what I did with this part that we just selected, I actually made that as a set selection to make it a different color compared to the capsule top part. So to do a set selection, you want to go to select, store selection. You can name this glowing light top part. Name it whatever name you want, and what you want to do is you can grab this texture here and drag this selection into here, and it will only texture this part here to be green, and that's exactly what we want, because these parts that are green, they will be glowing lights from the emission in Redshift. So right now we can't see our figure, so what I will do is actually just turn that off in the viewfinder here, and we can see the legs are cut off, which is definitely not what we want. So we will move this down. So we're gonna have to grab the bottom part, the background and the floor, and we're gonna have to shimmy it down just so there's a little bit of space so we can see all of the outfit. Right, now we can move on to the extra details that are on the floor of the reference image. So what it is pretty easy. We can go to a platonic here, and I was using a tetrahedron, I believe. So this tetrahedron is massive. We can make it something like 10 or 20. Make it, we can always resize it. So we get one of those. We also want a cloner. So you're going to hold Alt on your keyboard and press it whilst Platonic is highlighted, and it will, of course, make the Platonic a child of the cloner. Now click on the cloner. I want it to be radial. And we want 4 of them. We want symmetry, so we'll have 4 of them. Of course, readjust to see fit, and of course you can readjust the radius to be something like that. Another thing you can do is offset it, so you can rotate it this way as well. Yeah, something like that. Another thing I did was change the size of the platonic. So in Cloner you can do that. Go to transform. You can change the size, the scale, which is exactly what I did. You can make it wider. I don't want to make it wider, but I do want to make it a bit longer. You can readjust the radius. Down a little bit more so it touches the floor. And then I also had one more of these, so let me just rejig this a little bit. I'm trying to match the reference picture as good as I can. Alright, let me just have one more look at the scale. We could make this even bigger. Maybe it's also to do with the radius. You can make this also come out a little bit more, something like that. Okay, so we duplicate the cloner. So of course I use this trick all the time, so it's holding control and just dragging. Now this will be, if we offset so we can see it is a different one, and this time we want this one to be way longer, just to give it a point of difference. So it's way longer, however this one will be a little bit smaller, something like that. And then we can move this down a smidge. Nice. Another thing we will be adding to the scene is some of the rings on the floor. So the way that I made that was go to here, we go and find a tube. Now this tube is way too big. We can change the rotation segments to 64. Make it nice and smooth. Maybe make the height 10 or something. Now we want to place this on the floor, so there is a nice tool here that you can use as long as you're on model mode, and you can use place. So this will hopefully, you can move it so that it's aligned to the floor. So that worked. Now all you got to do is shimmy it over. And what I want to do for this is go into top view so that we can see if it's in the middle. I think that's alright. And now for the inner radius, we'll make it something like 90. Could even make it a bit thinner, maybe 94. And of course the height looks too big now, so the height maybe 5, something like that. And if we use that place tool again, just bring it to the floor. Or you didn't have to use the place tool, it's up to you. It's just a good way to align things to the floor without having to guess, to do guesswork. But you could also do something like this as well. Saying that, now that I've put this on the floor, I've noticed that this whole scene is also not aligned to the floor. So what we will do is highlight this tube, highlight this background and floor, and we will actually move it up until this touches. Something like this. Maybe move it down a smidge. There, something like that. Now this tube I can see now is intersecting in between here and it is too small, so we will actually make the radius bigger, make it 150, let's see. Maybe even bigger, we can make it 170. And make this 165. Yeah, something like that. And now we can just duplicate and make the rings bigger from this side, so we can control and drag again. And we'll make this radius something like 185. Oh, maybe even more. Something like here. And we do 235. We can do one more. We can drag here and do something like 280. And we can do 275. And that's all there is to it, really. You can readjust to however you see fit. And this can be 225. Of course, with all of these, I will highlight them and of course add this fillet or fillet. We will make this a lot smaller just so that it's subtle. We don't need a lot of it, but it does make a big difference. So if we go back to perspective, let's just have a quick look at these. Let's have a look at these edges. And yeah, we could even up the rotation segments as well, but that is completely up to you. If you want it smoother, just increase the rotation segments. But otherwise, this is pretty much the scene, my friends, and it's very simple. We can move on to texturing the scene and of course looking at the lighting. So now we can move on to texturing. What we want to do is go to panel. We can have a single view again. We could also get back our Redshift render view. So we can click this one here and just dock it back where it was before. And we can of course restart Redshift. Right, so everything is white. And of course that's not how we want it to be, so we have to readjust, of course, the textures. Let me just I've also made a Redshift setup, so let me just click that button up here and it will go to my saved layout, which I find pretty useful for when I'm editing. Okay, let's turn on Redshift. Right, so we'll go here. So I do have already some pre-made textures, but I will go through them with you guys. So for the metalness texture, let me just open it up. We double click on it. It is really just in the RS material, just a preset from the iron. So this is a preset that comes with Redshift. You click that. And of course, the roughness is just an image that I have here that's plugged into the roughness to give some kind of scratches to it. So if we're going to apply that metal, let me see, let's rearrange a few things, shall we? Put this into a null. We'll name this tubes on, or actually we'll name it rings on floor. And then the cloner, we can name those tetrahedrons on capsule. just keep everything all together. So we can grab this metal texture and just start applying it to all of these different groups. And for some reason the top's not being seen, so let's open this up. Maybe we have to drag it here. There we go, that's working. Nice. Okay, so here's our basic metal material. And then we want to see through this, we want to see through the glass. So the glass is this one here. Okay, and all it is the glass preset in Redshift as well. So a lot of these presets are really good and you can just use them, you can add to them. So I'm going to add this glass texture to the glass cylinder. And now we can see through this like it's glass. Now we are going to swap the green parts with some emission lights. So this texture, which is what we're going to replace it with. So we've got the diffuse here, diffuse color. And it's just the green color, the weight is all the way up to 1. If you go to overall, you can actually turn up the emission weight. And emission means that it's going to glow, it's going to light up. So if the emission weight was 0, it won't glow up. The higher it is, the more glowy it is. So this is our light, and let me just see, where do we replace it? Here. Now here's a tip. If you want to replace the texture without dragging it multiple times to each one, so we got 2 here. I know I want to replace this normal standard C4D texture with this Redshift one. So I'm going to hold this one or highlight it. I'm going to hold Alt on my keyboard and actually drag it onto the texture I want to replace. And it will automatically use that other one as a reference and replace it with the 2 parts that I have put the textures on. So you can see here it's definitely more of a glow. The last part is having the background and the floor having a texture. So with this we will drag, I believe this is the background texture. And this is the floor texture. So we'll drag both of those in. Nice. Now all of this looks great, except we have not enabled something for all of these. So what that is everything's looking quite flat, and as I say before, textures are not meant to be flat because in real life textures always have some type of imperfections or bumps. So how we show that in Cinema 4D and Redshift is by actually clicking right click on the layer, go to Redshift tag, add Redshift object, and go to geometry, override displacement. Now displacement will only work if you in your texture, so for example this background, if you've got a displacement node in here and with of course the image passing through it, that is what Redshift will read to make this have displacement. And you can see there's actually already a big difference from that, from what it was before. So for example, if I was to, I'm going to picture view this, if I was to, let's go back to this background and floor, if I was to turn this off, just wait for Redshift to do its thing. If we add this to picture viewer now, and if you look at the difference, huge difference, just looking at the floor and background. Everything looks a bit more pronounced, there's more details, there's almost like crevices and bevels, so you definitely want the displacement on. Right, so the texturing is done, everything's got all their base textures on, and we are ready to move into lighting. Currently we've only got 1 dome light, so I will show you guys the scene, the actual scene that I worked for this Deadfellas collaboration, and we will go through the lighting. And this was the final scene I was working with for Deadfellas collaboration. So you can see the atmosphere is different, and that's all thanks to lighting. So let's take a look at that. I do have a lot. And this is something I think that Redshift is really powerful at. So I do tend to separate a lot of my lights, and that's because sometimes one dome light might not suit the garment or it might not suit the environment. So I actually split my dome lights into 2. So they're using the exact same HDRI, however one of them is probably more intense compared to the other. So let's look at the intensity. Yeah, or the exposures are just a little bit different. and only slightly. And the way you can actually separate them, if you go to project, or project, I think it's project, you can include or exclude the assets that you don't want to include or you do want to include. So for the dome light for our environment, I only want the environment, this null, and the fog to be seen. And for the dome light for garment, I only want the outfit to be seen. So this is where it can get really powerful. So if I was to turn this one off, you can see it's definitely not as bright. Turn that back on, and if we turn off the dome light for environment, yeah, pitch black in the back. So this is where I think Redshift is really powerful, because you can really isolate these lights and just customize it to how you want the light to show. Another thing I like to do in my work is to put in edge lights or rim lights. So I've got two here, and you can see it is highlighting the edge, the red part here. So I've got two because I've got one angled for the upper body and one angled for the lower body. So if I just turn them off, I've got one here and one here. If we turn them off, you can see what is going to happen. So I don't know, I feel like for me, and for this concept for it being spooky, red and green seems like a really good, of course, sci-fi color, but also red will also stand out against the green fog, against the green garment. It will make it stand out. So that is why I decided to go with red. So we'll put those back in. And to keep in line with the red light coming through, because you got to think about where the light source is coming from. So for me, I had to make sure that the red light was coming from a source, and that source would be this top part here. In this section here, I've actually got two lights. So one of the lights is just a normal white light, I would say. And the second one is a red light, which you can see reflecting off here. And that would be this one here, a point light. So if I turn that off, there we go. So I wanted to emulate that the red light was coming from the top here. So that is why I had the red light. But I didn't want it to be too bright. It didn't make sense for the red to be so bright. Otherwise that would have affected the rest of the garment. So that is why I added another white light to balance it out. And then we just got 3 point lights actually for the bottom of here. If you think about it like you're showcasing off a sculpture or something in a tube, usually there's lights coming from the top and there's lights coming from the bottom. So for me, I added 3 different lights here. And let me just turn those off. You can see without it, this part gets very lost, gets very dark. So I wanted it to be like almost like spotlights shining on the subject. And that's why we have 3 spotlights or point lights shining up here. And of course, alongside with those point lights, we actually do have another area light that's happening at the bottom here, which is shining, getting all this lit up here. So this scene has a lot of lights. It has a lot of lights, but for different things. So if I was to turn off this light bottom, those point lights are not strong enough to even get that detailed across. So for me, I didn't want the details of the garments to get lost, so that's why I added another area light. And for the last light, that is the fog light. That is the light for the fog. And if we didn't shine a light through to the fog, we would not see this lovely green fog at all. But saying that, I just realized we haven't talked about the fog at all, have we? The fog, it is from a Redshift volume. And I believe you should be able to get to Redshift volume if you go to Redshift, Object, Redshift volume, and it will be one of these. To use the Redshift volume, you need to import a VDB file format in there. So I got this fog from a motion designer friend, and he created all of these as VDBs. So that is what I have imported here. To texture the volume, you need one of these. So you go to Create, Redshift, Materials and Volume, click on that. You'll get one of these, so let's open this one up. You can put in density, which is how thick it is. So you could either have a really thick smog or you can have a really light mist or fog. So that is something you can play with, of course, in the scatter and in the absorption. So I recommend, of course, putting in density and then The top one is pretty much where you put in your color, and then the bottom one, I believe, is the one that you play with the light and the absorption. The last thing we'll talk about is Aovs. So I use these a lot for when I render, especially for like color correction in After Effects or Photoshop. This is a really good technique just to make sure that in post-production you're able to change colors more easily instead of re-rendering the whole scene again. So what I like to do is to, of course, organize these into different folders, okay, in different groups. This really helps to just keep things organized. So what it will mean is that the outfit will have its own AOV, the environment will have its own AOV, and the fog will have its own AOV. And how we do that is by going to Redshift, make sure you have a Redshift object, and you just right click. Of course, go to Redshift tags, click on Redshift object, you get one of these. Then go to object ID, and you want to tick this one. It will be unticked, but you want to tick it. Put in a number from 1 to 3. Or, I mean, if you've got more objects, you can put it all the way to whatever number you guys want. But I've only got 3 here, so this one will be 3. Do the same for this one. This one is 2. And this one is 1. Then you can press Ctrl B on your keyboard. Go to your render settings. If we go to Redshift and in the Advanced tab, go to Aovs, Show Manager. Now I've already got Puzzle Mat already selected, but you would want to go through down this list and drag Puzzle Mat to here. Click on Puzzle Mat. Change this from Material ID to Object ID. Type in 1, 2, 3. And the 1, 2, 3, that is referencing what we put the numbers here for. And the last thing I do, I like to tick this direct output. And that will save wherever we save this file. And now you're ready to send this to render, and lastly composite it in After Effects. Thank you for watching, and of course if you guys got any more questions, feel free to reach out on my social media. My handle is pretty much the same on every single platform, so it's @Stephy Fung. And of course thank you to Maxon for having me on here.